Check, 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 check. Okay. Well, all right. Here we go. It's been the first time. Well, actually, I'm going to lie. I'm totally lying. It's probably this is my, I don't know, fourth time doing this because I keep messing up on something. I'm sure I'm going to mess up on this one too. I'm just going to put it out there. So now I'm just going to shoot from the hip and just do whatever. Without further ado, I do have to tell you, though, that today's energy level is brought to you by Electric Lemonade Ghost energy drink. I'm not sponsored by them, but, you know, it'd be pretty awesome to just have a bunch of ghosts show up at your house. You know, like real, like, paranormal ghosts. And then, like, a case of ghost would be pretty awesome, too. Just saying. But I'm not going to. Wishes were fishes, am I right? I have a whole pocket full of mackerels. Is that the way it goes? I think so. Anyway, getting into it, you know, in the words of the great Winston Wolfe, what the hell was that? Bigfoot. That's what it was. All right. So there was a Bigfoot sighting May 18th in Michigan. It was a kind of a big one. Here, let's look at it. This site right here is the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. And what this is a site that is kind of like the MUFON of UFOs. And this is, you know, kind of for Bigfoot. Well, not kind of, it is only Bigfoot. So if there's sightings that someone has or whatever, you go to this site, you can report it, and it's broken down by states and countries and everything. And you can go in and tap on all kinds of stuff. Anyway, May 18th. So May 18th, a son and a father were in kind of a populated area in a wildlife refuge area that a lot of people don't have access to. They're actually right here. Let me show you. They're actually right here where this area is here. And, you know, you can see the dense population all the way around it, right? And so they're bow fishing along this river here. And as they're bow fishing, well, as they're actually getting ready to leave, they start walking out, and the dog kind of scares up something that they think is deer. There's a lot of deer that live in that area, and you know there's a lot of fish and whatever. So they scare up something, and they hear this rustling in the bushes, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this giant creature drops out onto the ground. And then it doesn't make eye contact with him, but just takes off running, like just takes off as fast as hell. Now, they labeled this as a Class A, meaning the people that saw it, it wasn't, they definitely saw something standing on 2 feet running away that looked like, they call it like an ape looking, you know, object or thing. To be a Class A means that you couldn't have thought like, well, it could have been a bear. Like there is no like could have been. It was this. It was a thing that they landed. Now, what I think is funny, really funny, because it drives a complete visual to me, is what they describe when they go back, right? They see this thing, it disappears. It's 10 seconds, right? And what they describe, what they see when they have a follow-up investigator that goes out there, is one of the things that they notice is, let's see here, the animal was roughly 10 feet up the tree when it jumped down. At no time it was facing the 2 humans. The point of which they got the clearest look at it was when it ascended the embankment. They could see the hairy back and the big butt cheeks very clearly the last few seconds. So it's either a very hairy man or it's, I guess it could be what it reminds me of is all I think about if it was a bear. If you guys ever remember the movie Great Outdoors, this is what it reminds me of, is right there. Baldy the bear when it's shot in the butt and it has just bare butt cheeks. I mean, there's a possibility that these people might have seen Baldy the bear. I'm just saying. It could be very It very well could be. It's interesting that there's a Sasquatch in a tree too. There's not a lot of stories of Sasquatches actually being in a tree or Bigfoot being in a tree and jumping out. They're pretty rare because they're supposedly kind of a beefy animal, right? There are, Michigan is the home of the Dogman, which, they never saw the face of this thing, on the witness. So it could have been the famous Dogman, of Michigan. It very well could be, you never know, because there are a lot of cases of dogmen jumping out of trees. So that's like an actual, that's like a thing, or at least that's what's documented. I can't say it's a thing. I've never really actually seen one. But if I did, imagine what that'd be like. It'd be like a man with a dog face on it, I'm assuming, right? Maybe. I don't know. Either way, pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool of what they saw. Now, a lot of people have been speculating, though, that there's no way a Bigfoot could be in this area. So now let's look at this area one more time here. And, you look at how small it is and how populated it is. And like, how come no one's ever seen this before in this area? Why wouldn't they be there? That doesn't necessarily make sense. Well, this is kind of split on a lot of things with that. Excuse me while I have some of my delicious drink. The problem is it's almost the perfect spot to hide, right? Because it's a spot where you can't hunt. It's overrun by deer. It's also, it's clearly fish there, right? They're bow hunting, shallow. So it's shallow fish, most likely like carp or something like that, right? So endless supply of food. People aren't allowed to hunt there, so all of them go there anyway. And if you've ever lived in like an HOA, or in a city limit where you can't hunt, like Mammoth. I used to live in Mammoth Lakes, California, and the bears in Mammoth are gigantic. You can't hunt the bears in town. You don't see the bears during the day, but at night, when you go through those wooded areas, like connecting from Main Street to like where our house was, like you'd cut through these things, and at night the bears are inside that small space. So, that's the only time you'd see them, right? And if people aren't really out in an area like that, you're never gonna see them. But the food supply is perfect for a Bigfoot. It's absolutely perfect for. Why wouldn't it be? New Jersey, I lived in another place, another place that was full of deer, full of giant bear, and the bears you'd never see them during the day. Very rarely you'd see them during the day. Well, it's not true. Like, one day my dad had put on a new pair of underwear because giant bear came around the corner. But, there is a, perfect hiding spot and no one goes out there. And let's face it, nowadays, people aren't exactly venturing out, besides like these guys actually bow hunting, or actually venturing out outside of like whatever trail would be down there, right? Because no one usually does that anymore. No one really ventures off to try to explore beyond what is designated, unless you're breaking the rules of that property. You're welcome to go anywhere. But nowadays, people just don't really want that. They want to just flow wherever it's easy. And then that's kind of what they're going to say. So I do believe they could hide in there, and a lot of people say, well, it's so big. Bigfoot is so big. How is it possible that something so large could be found or be lost or not be found at all? Well, this is where I have a little bit of where I kind of disagree with a lot of people, because, if we were to talk about and bring up the forest elephants, right? Let's talk about the Congo forest elephants, which, if you don't know what a Congo forest elephant is, it's a smaller version than the safari elephant, which is usually like really broad ears, tusks are pointing outward. They're just a large animal. All elephants are large, by the way. I'm not, saying that this elephant's any better than the other elephants. They're all amazing. But the forest elephant, right? So just to get in here, I'm gonna put this up here. So the forest elephant is this last elephant right in this image on the far right. And then it's the African elephant, and then there's the Asian elephant from left to right. Asian elephant, African elephant, the Congo forest elephant. That elephant, even though this picture, because they probably had to make them all seem the same size in this image, or I mean in this however they photoshopped them in there to make this pamphlet. The forest elephant is half the size of a normal elephant. So it tops out at about 5,000 pounds and can be as small as 2,000 pounds. So a normal elephant usually starts at about 5,000 pounds to an adult, to like 8,000 to 9,000 pounds. So it is half the size of a normal elephant. And I guess it's, what I'm getting at is it's a very large animal, right? It's not a tiny animal. And in around 2010, see here, would it have been about 2010? No, it would have been a little after that. Probably would have been about 2014 or 15. In 2010, this actually happened. Around 2010, there was a group, the herd of forest elephants were getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And I know that I have one particular friend that could probably speak, really good into this because he spent a lot of time going after poachers and stuff like that there. But during this time, they had lost these elephants. And the elephants had trackers on them. The elephants, they knew where they were, and they lost them. The scientists completely lost them. Around 2014 or 15, we were working a deal with some scientists in a kind of an explorer company to go out and try to locate these. It was going to be the base of the show, to locate this lost herd. So, but it was like a real thing, nobody knew where these things were, even though they had trackers on them. Now, granted, I understand it's not a small little, couple 100 acres and maybe 100-acre plot of land in Michigan. I get that. The Congo is, that particular piece of forest is, I have it written down so I can actually, get it kind of right, is 7,570 square kilometers. So where these things were a little bit different, it's a little bit different, but still they have GPS trackers. They still lost them, right? They weren't found until recently in 2019, where a woman had gone out and filmed a documentary and found them again. So it had taken years and years and years to find a group of animals that we were tracking before, put tags on, and then disappeared into the jungle. And we weren't able to really identify further there. Now, there's a lot of parts that play into that, between poaching and human population moving in and all of that stuff. But again, they had trackers on them. So when people say it's impossible for something to hide in some sort of thing like that, I don't know, man. Like, it might be easier than you think. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I don't put it past that, and then I also think it's silly to me, and I'm just going to go off of all the naysayers right now because I'm just kind of whatever. I believe in everything, because there's no reason not to believe in everything until you're like dead, I feel like, because there's always a possibility. There's always a possibility of something being there, and if you don't want to believe it, or if you don't want to even lean in, it doesn't matter anyway, because you're never going to see it anyway. Or if you did, it doesn't even make a difference. You'll make up an excuse of why it doesn't matter to you. So, but now let's just talk about things that people thought were dead. I think we'd see a dinosaur by now. I'd hope anyway, because it'd be pretty awesome. If you could. I guess the closest thing is probably like a minotaur, or like a Komodo dragon or something like that. I'm not really sure. I mean, according to like Jurassic Park, I guess it would be like a bird, right? Raptor. Not really sure. Either way, I mean, you think you'd already see one, like, probably. And that's why I'm sure that's the way people feel about the Bigfoot in general. If you had this thing and it's extinct and it doesn't exist anymore, like, you'd think you'd see it eventually. If something as large as a Bigfoot, people would see it. They're just out and about. I get it, but I don't know. I think it's harder to find than you think. And I think that there's too many hiding spots. I also think the other problem is it's also an intelligent animal. And so it can discern a lot. And so it knows how to hide and it knows how to do whatever. But anyway, so, you know, people thought for years and years and years, the coelacanth, which is a fish, you know, that people thought was extinct for like, I don't know what. Let me see here. Let me pull this in here. They thought it was extinct. Well, let's put the fossils date back to 410 million years ago. And they thought they were extinct actually 66 million years ago. And then in 1938, all of a sudden, they're like, hey, here we are. And they're back. So we thought they were dead for a really long time. And I don't know. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, no, it's impossible. So people say things are impossible. This is one of those things where I'm like, you're full of shit. Sorry. You know? And then if you think 38's too far away, I mean, let's look at this rock rat, right? This was discovered in 2005. So we're even getting closer to this. This was thought to be extinct 11 million years ago. 2005. We're in the 2000s already. It's amazing. Like that's crazy. You thought this thing was extinct. I think that's nuts, you know? And it continues. We continue to find more and more and more things that people thought were either gone or extinct. You know, here's one that I thought I never actually knew about, and it's kind of a bummer. I never saw it, but this is a tree kangaroo, right? Black-footed tree kangaroo was thought to be extinct roughly 50 years ago, give or take. And then in 2016, all of a sudden they're like, oh, there they are. We have them again. They're in Papua New Guinea. I go to Papua New Guinea a lot for a lot of different stuff, and I've never seen one. It'd be awesome to see one. Granted, it looks kind of like one of those, like a red panda, kind of, you know, kind of cute things. I bet you'd rip your face off. Kind of be like that scene in, what is it, Tropic Thunder? Yeah, with the panda. Doesn't the panda come and rip off the guy's face? I think so. Or is it fall out of the tree and then he kills? I'm not really sure. I don't remember exactly how that goes, but that's what it looks like. It looks like a cuddly animal that would rip your face off. But we thought it was dead, and it's not. In 2016, rediscovered. So you all can rest easy because things are still out there. Again, there's a whole point to this because I just feel like I feel like there's too many people that think that stuff just doesn't exist. And I think it's important to remember that stuff does. And there's things that we haven't discovered yet, you know? And, you know, for instance, we want to get really, really, really close, like not even rediscovery. Like those were rediscoveries. Now we're talking things that we actually just discovered for the first time. And let's just start with, well, I'll just do this one because otherwise it's just like too much. Like what the F are you doing, Brian? And guess what? I don't know. I still am trying to put that together exactly. So I'm not really sure. But all right. This was discovered in 2003. Okay. It's a new species. It came out of Thailand, Vietnam area, Laos, Myanmar area. And you might have seen it all over TikTok or Instagram. I think this is an Instagram photo. I'm not really sure. But this is the vampire hedgehog, which is exactly what you think it would look like. It's a hedgehog with vampire teeth. It's cute as hell, not gonna lie. But again, one of those animals that might just like, I don't know, rip your face off, you know? It might just totally rip your face off. It actually makes you wonder if Monty Python was really, You know, when he said that there was rabbit with the big pointy teeth, like, I mean, this is right there. I mean, there is a hedgehog with big pointy teeth. I think we need to remake that movie, or at least that section, or do something like it, because this is something. You best buckle up. But hey, we discovered it just now, 2003, brand new. And I don't know. So I have a hard time with all the haters that say that stuff's impossible. It's not impossible. Nothing's impossible. Here we go. Bigfoot. All right. There's a lot of stories about Bigfoot. Tons. They go back crazy deep in history, right? You know, you can find stuff all the way back from, you know, origin stories are back, like most of them are from the Northwest. A lot are from the Northwest. A lot of indigenous folklore and a lot of those types of stories that have been going on forever. One of the things going through a lot of these things is I found a lot of similarities through a lot of different people's encounters of this particular thing. And going through a lot of different stories, a lot of them are kind of put Bigfoot as a protector of the forest. A lot of them do in lore, but then there's also a bunch of stories that are just, they're kind of the same. And when people step into their neighborhood, that they just straight up throw down and make sure that you don't want to ever, you know, come to that neighborhood again, or they'll run you out of town, you know? So one great story is one that was collected from Teddy Roosevelt. And it was in a book called The Wilderness Hunter. And in that book, he wrote about this Bigfoot encounter in this book when he was in the Rough Riders. The book was from 1892. Wilderness Hunter, again, is the name of it. He writes a story in here about a trapper named Brahman whose partner was killed by some sort of creature after several nights of harassment at their camp. Now, there's a lot of stories of harassment at camps. Matter of fact, there's a lot of stories of harassment from this type of species style of animal across the globe. We could go to Vietnam, you know, talk about the rock apes, the occurrences in that. Like, there's another great book about that. Very Crazy GI. Strange but True Stories of a Vietnam War by Greg Jorgensen. Now, there's some great collections of stories in here, you know, and they're all kind of similar to a lot of the other stories that have been told throughout history. People being ripped apart, people being, you know, a lot of rocks being thrown at each other, people's encampments being attacked. And it's interesting, you know, kind of how that works out. When I was in New Mexico, I was with an elder in New Mexico on a reservation land, and we were doing a scout for a different show. I can't remember what show it was, but we're doing a scout and so he was taking me around. He was chief. He was taking me around the area and looking at all types of different stuff. And he had, you know, at one point we had taken a rest by the river, and he turns to me, and I can't remember what we were doing. We were doing it was some totally different show. Man, I wish I remember what it was. It was a show not to do with paranormal, not to do with adventure. It was none of that. And we were just looking for a pretty location. Anyway, you know, he goes on to tell me, you know, as we're sitting here next to this river, he goes on and starts talking to me about the, you know, he turns and he's just like, have you ever seen Bigfoot? Or have you ever witnessed anything like that? Sitting there, just kind of out of left field, you know, you kind of turn to him and cock your head a little bit, you know, knowing that I'm extremely interested, but, you know, I kind of have to hide that a little bit, you know, you don't want to come out and show all your cards, you know. I looked at him, kind of chuckled a little bit and said, yeah. I was like, I've had a couple of encounters, you know, but nothing crazy, nothing I've ever seen, you know, and if I've seen it, it's from a distance. Never seen anything that's like close. And so he starts telling me a story. Just telling me a story about how he was deer hunting, bow hunting. and he's sitting along kind of similar to where we're at. And there's like an embankment, behind you. And he said all of a sudden he was just overwhelmed by this odor. Couldn't really figure out where it was coming from. And so he's sitting there, and he's like, man, almost questioning, like, does he need to shower type situation? Because it's just wafting, And he turns around, and in the way he describes it was the guy, he turns around, there's this thing sitting behind him, probably, I don't know, 20 feet or so. And it's like it disappeared in the bush. It was like it's not 100% like, the bush is solid, and there's like a little underbrush, and there's like this kind of like thicker pine tree type situation. And he says through the underbrush you can see this thing just staring at him. And it just stared at him. And then he walked away. But he was always watching. He always said that they're always watching. They're always watching, make sure that you're not going to mess up their land. And I was like, and he goes, just remember, if you ever go out, it's their land. Don't ever mess with them. They're always watching. But if you have that smell, he said, if you ever have that smell, it's something. And I was like, all right, cool. On to the cafeteria type situation. I just wanted to kind of continue to move on. But it was, I was like, that's interesting. So using that mindset and looking at some of these stories from the past of, people coming into new locations and the disturbances that have happened to them, from let me see if I have a couple of encounters here that I've kind of pulled out. Some are good and some are bad. The Klamath tribes up in the Pacific Northwest, they call Bigfoot basically the guardian of the trees, right? Protects deep woods from human greed. That's what they're claiming that, and then there's another story that, this is more of the nice side of it, right? And this was in Northern California in the 80s, where a wild man saved a child, where a 3-year-old had disappeared and vanished into the forest on a camping trip. There were no tracks, no nothing. And then she was gone for 3 days. And on the third night, she walked back on the third night, she walked back to the camp completely unharmed, holding pine cones and saying, the big hairy man kept me safe. He brought me berries and told me that the woods were sad. So I think I think that's what it is. And then people that kind of push into these new areas, they become kind of territorial. This is, and as I continue to go down through some of this stuff, I'm like, oh, this is very, very familiar, with these types of, I feel like if they're protectors and people are moving into their territory and they become very, very territorial, and you're tearing things down, building cabins, thinking about that in that time, right? You're going into areas, you're cutting down trees, you're building cabins out of their trees. You're cutting roads, you just think of it, you're mowing down fields and fields of trees to be able to build farming stuff. I mean, if somebody came into your yard and cut down a bunch of trees, I think you'd be pretty pissed off, and I don't think this is any different. I really don't. And you can, I really, really don't. But all the stories kind of collaborate that way, like a good story that's kind of they made a show about it is about Port Chatham, which is also known as Portlock, right? Port Chatham, that was a canning location, and it was a cannery from that basically from the 30s to the 50s were terrorized by this giant creature that eventually chased everyone out of town. And the village was deserted. So here it is. It's in the, Portlock's way down here. If you've ever been there, I don't know, like I've been there a few times. There's nothing there. It's still abandoned. I wasn't there for the show that they shot, but I was there for my other things. But there is it's fascinating to me that people completely left because they were terrorized by some sort of creature. So, here's the curse of Portlock. This kind of gives you a rundown of the story, but there's stories of people being found dead, ripped to pieces, the same way that it's described in the Theodore Roosevelt story. So I think there's just so many similarities in these types of things. I think it's crazy. I think it's fascinating that they are so similar in that that this type of stuff has happened. Now, in Alaska, in the interior, I spent a lot of time in Alaska with a bunch of people for a lot of different times, numerous different shows, whether they were adventurous outdoor shows, gold mining shows, or living off the land style, shows, building shows, tons of things. We did spend a lot of time with the Athabascan culture there. And we learned a lot about the way the wilderness works when you're surrounded by nothing. Well, the Athabascans have a name for something that's there that they called it, that I'm not going to refer to because they just say that it's, bad luck and bad mojo and no one's supposed to talk it. You're never supposed to say the name. It's just, it's what it is. The stories that reflect kind of the same thing that I'm talking about, people refer to them as the silent walkers, which is basically Bigfoot, when it's said to watch from the shadows, punishing those who waste animals and cut down old growth trees without cause. Hunters who show respect report strange signs, tracks that circle their camp without without entering, or gifts in stacked rocks and clean bones left nearby, as if someone was watching but also approving. Now, there are some of these stories that we've heard when we were out there, and some of these stories that, when we were out there, we've seen. I mean, people would tell all kinds of stories where families of these Bigfoot would be on the rock ledges along the Yukon River and be screaming and hurling rocks down below. Some people in the village that we were at would also tell us stories of people when they first came, when they were younger. So, we're talking about people, these stories are, from us, 50, 60 years old, when they were kids, which, Alaska's pretty populated compared to like 50 years ago. The stories of what I've heard from where we were at is night and day. Still very rural for the average person, but compared from there to now is, my gosh, I can't even imagine what that would be like. But the stories that they have told and the events that people have had a run-in with them, more so when they were building new things on land, like they were building fish camps, they were building things along the Yukon to start bettering themselves, and that's when they would start having these encounters with these creatures, is when things started changing. So as we're there and we're in central Alaska, we start hearing a lot of these stories, and as we're there for almost 5 years, in and out, 5 years ish, maybe more, we kind of became ingrained in the community to the point of where people starting to open up a little bit, and you'd hear a lot of even the darker, weirder, cooler stuff of the forest and the things that it would provide. And one particular place we used to go was this camp that was upriver, probably, 5 minutes outside of town, up the Yukon. And we'd go up there, and they had a really nice freshwater creek we'd grab water out of, because water wasn't all that great in town. And we would, grab fresh water, we'd hang out, usually just kind of used it as a chill moment, really, usually as like a day off or something like that. We had permission from the owners to be there. But this particular area was said to have been kind of a spot where a lot of these creatures have been. And, this particular day, a group of guys go up to this camp, they go hang out, and they pull up. If you've never been to the Yukon, when you hit the Yukon River is very soft. It's silty ground, very mucky. If it's too mucky, you're up to your ankles. Usually, though, you're right around, right below your ankle, kind of. Never really over the top of your foot, but like about that high. That's kind of the muck value of it. And then, but that's kind of the Yukon River, right? It's just the way the muckiness is. So they pull up, beach the boat. They all jump out. They run up to the the cabin. They check everything out, make sure everything's cool, make sure no bear's broken, make sure everything's cool. And then they leave, and then they're like on their way out. So a couple hours go by, and the cabin's up high compared to where the boat is staying. So, or where the boat's moored, and they go out, or moored, I guess I can't say moored, beached, and when they walk back down to the boat, they come across a set of tracks. Now, these have never been seen by anyone before, and I'm probably going to get shit for showing them. Sorry, I'm swearing a little bit, but that's okay. Life goes on, and we're doing it anyway. So between the boat and where this clear water stream would come out, as they approach the boat from the clear water stream, going in past the boat, right next to the boat, and into the Yukon, was a set of tracks. And this is what it looked like. So the rock to your right, that is the freshwater stream exiting that way. The boat is to the left of here. I wish there was another wider shot so you could kind of see the whole lay of the land to understand. And I also wish there was something that we could say the size of what this foot is, right? Needless to say, it was a barefoot foot, and no one was down there, right, in that area. So let's look at, so this is what it looks like over foot. Now, if you look at this foot, right, and again, I wish we had something that size, to really understand. What I think is so interesting about it is that there's no arch. It's flat. It's flat, and I don't know. It's like one gigantic pad, compared to, I mean, even if you look like where the toes are, usually like if it's a bear, right? The bear has a pad right underneath the toes. And then at the tip of the toe, usually you'll see indentions from where the claws of the bear would be from that step, and that's usually where it is. And plus these toes are almost human-like. And this is where, I go back and forth with some of this stuff, because it could totally be people effing with other people, right? Absolutely. I don't believe it though, because all these guys were kind of shit themselves a little bit. So I don't really think that's what it is. It's just, and the only reason I say that is just because of how bunched the toes are together. Looks like to me it could have been a modern day foot inside of a shoe, to be realistic. But shoot, man, I don't know. I just know that this particular area always has scenes, or has always had people have occurrences in this particular area. And this is what it, so to me, I'm just automatically just thinking, okay, cool, this is a Bigfoot foot. But if you've ever seen, anyone like like an islander, someone who, a native islander who doesn't usually wear shoes, and run in the forest, their pads are kind of like that. Like their foot becomes one gigantic pad. The only difference is between that in someone who usually doesn't wear shoes is the separation of the toes. There's no restriction, right? You're not used to wearing a shoe, so there's no restriction to hold your toes together, to be able to actually hold them, to like where if you look at that picture, it's like they're smashed together a little bit. But I guess I've never really looked at, which I guess I should go. I'm going back to Papua New Guinea on, I don't know, later at the end of the summer, I think. Yeah, August. I have to make a note of that, to like look at some of the guys that we work with, to look at their feet and look at their footprints to see and compare it. I don't know why I've just thought about that right now, but I should totally do that, because that's the one thing that throws me off without that picture, looking at more. But what's interesting about that place and what's interesting about that footprint is, so we were there, this exact area. Now, I'm not saying these incidences coincide. I'm not saying that this footprint and the story I'm about to tell you are the same occurrence, but it is the same area, and it is in the exact same area, and it is about the same time frame. So this story was in 2013 or 14 is when this happened. That picture is from about 2013, 2014. So it's like the exact same time frame of when that is in this picture and this story. So there was a group of Athabascan youths that had an encounter near the town of Tanana. So the town of Tanana is actually where I was. So this is the exact same area. But two 14-year-old boys were gathering wood near a camp along the Tanana River, which is the river, which I was up the Yukon a ways. There's a V, and then you walk across the V, if you could trek across, and there's the Tanana River. So it's still, as a crow flies, you're probably talking, I don't know, probably a mile, but it's close. Needless to say, it's a close spot. It's pretty close to where this is at. So while on a boat about half a mile from camp, they observed a large, hairy, bipedal creature watching them off the shore. The boys described it as standing upright with long arms and a thick build, and were frightened, basically. They quickly returned to camp and reported the sighting to the elders that were there at camp, and they were advised to leave the area and just avoid the area altogether. Now, that area is roughly the same area of where we were. Like, it's you're up the Tanana River a little bit. This is up the Yukon River a little bit. It's the same area. And I think, if you're talking, if you're thinking about like the forest elephants, right? They're in that area. This is smaller than that. You're maybe talking 20 square miles from where that sighting was from where we were, and that's probably even bigger than what it would be. There's other stories that people have told me about that area as well. Stuff's out there. It's I just think you just have to keep looking. And I also think it's a respect thing. Like, I guess if you really want to piss off Sasquatch or Bigfoot, I think it's the bottom line is you start cutting down a bunch of trees, see what happens, right? Go to one of those areas, cut down a bunch of trees. Not actually, I'm just kidding here. I'm just kidding. Don't actually go in there and be like, Brian said to cut down a bunch of trees and see what happens. It's a bad idea. That's, kind of what I'm going on. But so that's one thing that happened in Alaska. Another one happened totally other side of Alaska. Well, not really the other side, kind of northeast. This is up by Nome. And it happened with, a friend of mine and myself. We're out filming, we're out filming B-roll. We're shooting aerials. So we had a drone, and we were trying to we were just shooting out over, coming up the valleys with the drone, revealing all the cool stuff, big, beautiful stuff. It's kind of fall time, which, very much is bear season, mind you. It was also, everything else. But we're coming through this valley. We have a headwind. So it took a while for the drone to get back to us as we saw this thing in the distance. But we had to change the battery on the drone. So this drone's flying towards us. It's fighting a headwind, so it's just eating up battery, and we didn't have enough battery to go back to what we had saw on the hill and then to come back towards us. What we see is this in the distance as this thing's coming back. We see this, it looks like a person, a huge person, which because of the distance, I mean, I don't know how big this person would have had been. I mean, because even an elk or a bear, it would have been a giant bear. And it could very well have been a bear. But the shadows kind of didn't look like a bear because the shadow was long. It was kind of an overcast day. It was just enough of a shadow to be where you could see it. You could make it out. And so it seemed long, and we're sitting there and we're watching this thing move up the side of the mountain at a pace that I was shocked by, like moving, right? By the time the drone gets back to us, we load the drone back up with a battery and we launch the drone to head back out. And so we're trying to see if we can catch up to this animal. By the time that we had loaded the drone and sent the drone out, this thing is just cresting the top of this ridge. On the top of the ridge, it was just like low bush. It was like, probably knee high to ankle high low bush and just kind of moss heads, like those moss heads and just big sets of moss everywhere, big open field, nothing. And then it falls off into forest, right? So we fly back across, we try to get up over the top of the river, get up to the top of the ridge. We go down the side of the ridge and it's this huge open field and there's nothing there. No idea where it went. Couldn't find it. Went everywhere, tried to do whatever we could using the rest of our battery to try to figure out, like, where did this thing go? But it was definitely not like anything we've seen. We've filmed bears. I've seen wildlife out there, spent a lot of time, with wildlife out there. And this was like unlike anything I'd ever really seen before. And so then, all I have is my visual. So, but then I started scouring the internet, trying to really figure out, like, has someone else seen something similar so I could at least show someone what we saw, or at least having a visual of what I saw, because it's just hard to explain. But I think the easiest, so I have one, and the sighting is, it's okay. It's rough. It's somebody holding the camera from clearly like really far away because you can see the haze and stuff coming off the lens. But in a nutshell, though, this is kind of, let me make it big so you can have the best view at it. This is kind of what I saw. And it moved about this fast. And bears do move fast, right? Don't get me wrong. If a bear's running up a hill, you're seeing its head, it's going to look like it's standing. You're going to see the head, you're going to see the back, you're going to see like everything and all fours moving. But from a distance, it's going to look like it's something standing there. Don't, I'm not fooling myself here. It's like, that's possibility of what it could have been. This is kind of what it looked like. A bear will run uphill very fast. I know it's very, oh, look at this. Hang on though. I guess we gotta wait for this commercial apparently to play. It's AI, quantum computing. Get it, skip it. Here we go. Okay. So this is what it kind of looks like. So forgive me. I know it's very, 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 very hard, but now this right here, where this is, you're going to start seeing this thing starting to move. See the shadow right here? Now you see it moving. And so that's his shadow right there. But now what you're going to see is a massive speed right here. and you see the speed, all of a sudden it was just gone. Just takes off. But you can see it walking almost. You know, and I'm going to be judgy on this one because, you know, this is the easiest thing that I can describe of how fast it moved. You know, but I am going to be a little judgy on this one because it is so far away and it could easily be this. And looking at it, even though it's all broken apart, it does look like a potential of a skier. Not, you know. Oh, I didn't realize they walked up there. Look at that. They walked up there. Apparently they had tracks. Huh. Who knew? Looks really small. Looks like a heel boot, doesn't it? Kind of looks like a heel boot there, doesn't it? I've never seen this. That's new to me. But I wish they had a close-up picture. And it does look like, I mean, whatever they're dragging there too. Huh. Because I was gonna say it kind of looked like a skier. Anyway, I'm losing you guys. I probably lost you guys like, I don't know, however many minutes in we are, probably 4 minutes into that. Which is fine. That's all right. Anyway, that was my other Bigfoot encounter out there. But, you know, been a part of some other stuff. Definitely seen some things that we definitely couldn't explain for sure. And sounds that you couldn't explain. But they're rare. They're very rare. They're more like these two things, you know, and you know, two things that I shared with you are kind of like the outside of people's personal stories they've already had. Those were probably my two closest encounters of anything like a Bigfoot that in my career that I've actually come across. You know, not to say that they were really good encounters. I mean, shoot, I would love to have an encounter like Michigan. You imagine like a big thing, like jumping out of the tree and then just taking off? That'd be amazing. That'd be so cool. Although I'd have to laugh my butt off though if it was just like big hairy butt cheeks running to the distance. Like there's no way around that. You know, what if, you know, what is the movie? The movie where they accidentally shoot Bigfoot? Strange Wilderness. Yeah. Strange Wilderness. Shout out to you, Dave. You know, Strange Wilderness. If you've never seen it, it's one of the funniest movies ever. You know, not to give away too much about it, but it's about these people going out to find Sasquatch, and they find him. And, you know, they all get scared. And it's funny. But it makes me think of like something jumping out of the tree. Or if Sasquatch is super nice and just protecting the forest and trying to like make sure people are taken care of. I'm not saying there aren't bad, you know, mean things out there. I'm sure, you know, there's probably a mean thing out there that rip you in half. Anyway, the stories are fun. That's all I have right now. I'm going to dig into some other stuff. I don't know if you like it, smash it. You know, smash the old subscribe button. And you might get more nonsense that you might want to just turn down the volume on. Or you just shut it off. Or if you wanted, you could actually just log in, hit play, and then you don't have to do anything, really. You can just walk away. You know, maybe like the next time you go to the grocery store or something like that, you just look me up. Look me up at it's Fulsnr, you know, on YouTube. You know, I'll put some show notes in there. You can everybody just click on it and just play it. You don't have to listen to it. It's fine. If you want to drop a comment, go ahead. Most people do. Most of them are hateful. It's okay though. Well, this is what I'm going to do now until the industry picks up. So fingers crossed the industry picks up quick because you guys are in for some BS stories. Anyway, until next time, I might actually have a person on here if I can talk him into it, but he's scared. He'll come around. Anyway, thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. This Ghost Energy drink also thanks you. Because I don't know how else I could get through the day right now. Just one ghost at a time.